You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
I've got a Stack Waddy game, Mark.
Excellent.
I just came up with it. Okay, this is strange names of the offspring of music stars. Okay, one of these five is not the case. Okay, one of these five is a figment of my imagination. Here we go. Chris Martin and Gwyneth Paltrow had a child called Apple.
That's true. That I am absolutely confident is true.
One Direction's Liam Payne and Girls Aloud's Cheryl had a son called Bear.
I'm not going to commit myself to that, but I think it's likely.
Rapper T.I., whose real name is Harris, has a daughter called Eris Harris. I can't even say it. Eris Harris.
The way you delivered that suggests to me that you're reading it off something and therefore you didn't invent it, which is the wrong way to look at these things. But I'm going to think that's probably true. But carry on. I'm not going to commit myself.
The daughter of Paul Kantner and Grace Slick was called God.
God, I know that. God, who changed her name to China.
Okay. And son of No Doubt's Gwen Stefani and Gavin Rossdale is called Zuma Nester Rock. Zuma Nester Rock. Your tea's ready.
Go and tidy your room. Well, I've got to assume it's that last one because it is so utterly preposterous. The one that was not true was obviously Paul Kantner and Grace Slick. There was only a rumor that they were going to call their child God because some offhand remark made by Grace Slick to a maternity nurse, to a midwife or whatever, and they decided not. They pulled back from calling the child God and called her China instead. Oh, I thought it was called China, and then they changed it to God, and then changed it to China. Okay, I stand corrected.
And I was just looking her up, and I was delighted to see that China Slick is now 57 years old.
Oh my God!
And is kind of is taken to the ministry, which shows you what happens to the offspring of
anybody who is originally going to be called God.
Yeah, absolutely. Of rich hippies. So there you go. Okay, you win there, I suppose.
That's fantastic.
I'm going to ask you two questions about the general election, which was announced this week, and the extraordinary spectacle of the press conference in Downing Street. And it does strike me as amazing that on the one hand, we accept that contemporary politics is kind of like a branch of show business. It's dictated at every step by spin doctors and people trying to control what they call the optics. And it's all about how it looks on television. And yet, even when that's the case, you can get an utter 5-alarm catastrophe like that Downing Street announcement. You know what I mean?
No, but you see, I'm going to stop you there.
If you'd made that, if Armando Iannucci had made that up for the thick of it, everybody would have thought, no, that's ridiculous.
I'm going to stop you there because I watched it live actually because I was so fascinated, and also because they delayed it by 10 minutes because they're waiting for the rain to stop. And I thought, I've got to see what happens. Now, the question is, what would you have done? The various options. One is he could have come out holding an umbrella, and in which case he would have looked a bit daft. Two, he could have come out holding an umbrella or with somebody else holding an umbrella over him, which I think would have looked dafter, actually. Three is he could have stood in the rain as he did, in the manner of kind of Jurgen Klopp. Really, it was that kind of thing about I'm going to go out there and I'm going to survive the elements and I'm going to do it and show resilience, which he did do, and he looked absolutely ridiculous and thus gave headline writers the kind of drowning out possibilities, the things can only get wetter, etc. Well, the other is he could have done it inside. But if you do it inside, then it's not the traditional way of delivering those messages, which is with the podium outside number 10. And it doesn't look like you're connecting with the people. So I'm not sure quite how he could have won. Now, obviously, he came out lamentably badly. Plus, of course, they had the things can only get better, Steve Bray kind of sound system playing, which drowned him out. What should he have done?
The umbrella would have been my favourite. I haven't surveyed what you used to call the tabloids to see the headlines. But the thing I couldn't help thinking of when I saw pictures of it.
Drowning Street.
No, well, the thing I was thinking of, do you remember when Steve McLaren was, in his last hours as the England manager?
Yeah.
Where he appeared as the Wally with the brolly,
Yes.
And I thought, surely that's just begging to be dusted off and brought back by the subs, the Wally without the brolly or whatever. The other strange thing is it drew attention to something that I have found vaguely disturbing about Rishi Sunak ever since he was first came into public life, is the habit of wearing suits that look slightly too small for him.
I know.
So consequently, if a man is out there in a torrential downpour and you're looking at pictures of him, with abs, it could not be more soaked. You're thinking it looks as if it shrunk on him as a consequence.
It looked as if it shrunk. It also looked like it was made of a man-made fibre, actually, because it didn't absorb any of the damp. It was just huge, great pools of water all over him. So
it is staggering.
His suits are a bit like the ones Alexei Sayle used to wear, aren't they? They're kind of he's busting out of it, even though he weighs about 4 stone 6.
Yes,
but what I mean, I couldn't also believe that. Obviously he's surrounded by advisors who don't advise, who are making sure that whatever he says is going to be in the right context, and there's no opportunity for getting it wrong. But I couldn't help but think that thing in Wales, he flew yesterday, didn't he? By private jet, incidentally, from Wales to Scotland and England as well. I'm surprised he didn't go to Ireland as well. And he's sitting there in a pub trying to make small talk, and he says, so looking forward to the football, implying I'm a football fan, which is so patently untrue. And this is deathly quiet, isn't there? Until somebody says to him, Wales is the only country that didn't qualify. So they're not looking forward to football. It was just, it was lamentable.
The other thing about the election is that they're not going to have enough candidates, are they, at this election? They're racing around, partly because there's, 6 weeks to go or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And partly because people now leave politics at the point that they used to kind of enter politics. You know what I mean? We've seen loads of examples of this, all over the world. If you're gonna kind of make it as a top level politician, you're probably going to make it in your late 30s, aren't you? You're going to be in line for one of the major offices of state. And if for one reason or another it goes wrong, they don't just think, well, okay, I'll dedicate myself to public service because I'm here to make everybody's lives better, or to try and get the economy going in the right direction, or to deal with, long-term issues like the post office scandal or the infected blood scandal, all those things. They just think, no, sod this for a game of soldiers. I'm going off to be on the telly, or to be in the city.
I'm going on the lecture circuit, or I'm going to go and join some Silicon Valley company and make a fortune, It's incredible how many people have done that. I tell you a really good example of that. Do you remember the Conservative MP Louise Mensch? This is about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago.
Oh, right, yes. Yeah.
Very kind of charismatic, kind of very, very good looking, and clearly in it just to make a name for herself and then go off and do something else, And she was the one who was married to... I think Peter Mensch, who was the manager of Snow Patrol. So she was just kind of getting a level of celebrity and then going off. And various people have. You think of David Miliband, Rory Stewart, Nick Clegg. These guys have just done brilliantly, haven't they?
They've done absolutely.
Those are people who were kind of left or were eased out for whatever reasons, or it all wound up. But they've done phenomenally well.
They have.
Right. Whereas rock stars, the ones now staying until the bitter end.
Absolutely. That's the thing. You used to, the politicians.
Used to be lifers. Tony Benn was the last one, I think. Tony Benn was one of those people who joined early and it was a vacation.
Frank Field, who died just the other week.
Yeah.
Who genuinely was an absolute lifer and utterly devoted himself to public service. All through it. Nobody does that anymore. They just think, this is too much like hard work. And also, you do have the genuine, the additional hazard post-social media that people are now, they find themselves in the crosshairs of really worrying public attention. People, threatening their families and children and all that. And you've got to take that stuff seriously. It's appalling, but it is a fact of life. So why wouldn't you just turn away and think, no, I'll go and have a nice column in the Observer or something.
Totally, which is partly why so many of the Conservative MPs are fed up about this early announcement, because it's now they thought they had 6 months to plan the next part of their career on the assumption that they might not get re-elected. So
I'd say the other thing is slightly dismaying is post the announcement is seeing the kind of glint in the eyes of all the people running political podcasts or YouTube channels or whatever. It's like, this is what we're here for now. It's like all the World Cups have arrived at once. You know what I mean? And we're going to be following it every step of the way. And you think of the general public is thinking, I don't want to be following it every step of the way.
No, I really thought that last night. And you're watching. I personally really, really want him to succeed, Keir Starmer, but he's not that charismatic to watch. He's just not thrilling, and it makes me very nervous watching him because I want him to be good, and I would feel very slightly disappointed. And the idea that we've got 6 weeks of this.
He is startlingly uncharismatic. Yeah, for somebody who was a top lawyer, and he's clearly a very capable man. Yeah. Point a camera at him, you think, oh, please stop.
No, I know. You feel that, okay, well, what we really do need is possibly some substance now, but it's very hard to watch anybody on the television who doesn't have a little bit of crackle about them. And absolute absence with him.
So, it can't be over. It can't be over quickly enough for me.
No, like the Rest is Politics podcast, they started a sort of live podcast, didn't they? It was about 25 minutes after the announcement. Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell were on air. Fantastic. They're making hay.
The Word Podcast, prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
So we were talking last week about AI, and I asked, I think I asked ChatGPT to come up with a sentence about the Beatles written by David Hepworth, and they duly did. It was pretty stacked full of cliches. But anyway, Paul Kent was listening, and he's got in touch, and he's been on ChatGPT further to that. And he asked it to write a sentence describing British journalist and broadcaster Mark Ellen in the style of David Hepworth. So this is about you in the style of me. Okay. Mark Ellen, that perennial dynamo of British music journalism, possesses an uncanny knack for merging wit and insight, effortlessly straddling the worlds of broadcasting and publishing with a charm that's as enduring as the vinyl records he so passionately champions. So there you go. That's me on you.
See, I mean, it's got some cliches, but it also, you come out of that quite well. I come out of mine very badly, I think.
No, but okay, so this is
This is David Hepworth, described by the AI Mark Ellen. Says, David Hepworth, a stalwart of British music journalism, combines a razor-sharp intellect with an infectious enthusiasm for the stories behind the music, deftly weaving anecdotes and analysis into a tapestry that brings the rock and roll era vividly to life. Oh. Now, actually, I wouldn't use tapestry, obviously.
No, you wouldn't.
But I'm afraid to say razor-sharp intellect, I probably have used. It sounds like me. Deftly is very Mark Allen.
There you go.
So I was a little bit humbled by reading that and thinking, yeah, bang to rights.
This is a junction in the Word Podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
So talking of things virtual, we've been looking at the extraordinary footage of the Grateful Dead, or not the Grateful Dead, Dead and Company.
Dead and Company. Who we ought to explain who they are, actually. Dead and Company are the group that Bob Weir's kept going, as they originally with Bill Kreutzmann and Mickey Hart, the two Dead drummers. But Bill Kreutzmann, I think, is retired now, isn't he? And Phil Lesh has his own band, doesn't he? Phil Lesh and Friends. So it's just two of them. But the other key members, so it's Mickey Hart and Bob Weir, various others, and also John Mayer, isn't it? John Mayer, significantly, is the kind of main guitarist. So that's the group.
And they've followed U2 into that extraordinary venue in Las Vegas, the Sphere, which has got, 170 foot high, whatever, wrap-around screen inside, so that the opportunities to present yourself in new ways are pretty much unprecedented. And what I've seen of the Dead, which is obviously mainly just a few bits that they put out to promote it, but also, everybody's going in there with an iPhone or whatever and shooting their own version of it from the back of the place. It looks absolutely extraordinary, doesn't it?
Just fantastic. It's absolutely astonishing. That review in Variety, this guy says it is the most visually spectacular show I have ever seen in my life. And this is somebody who's just been going to rock concerts all his life. Described it as a laserium on steroids. And he said at the end, he said something like, sometimes in life you need to see giant dancing skeletons. Sometimes you need epic ferns and fawns. And sometimes you need to surf the rings of Jupiter while listening to what is basically a spacey variation of jazz and roots music, which is quite a good description of the Dead, actually. But what it struck me was that it sounded like the first concert that was effectively more like going to the movies than going to a kind of performance by a rock band, because we've only seen those 2 or 3 clips, but it's interesting that the clips are almost entirely the visuals, aren't they? You're surrounded by, it's not just a backdrop, isn't it? This is right over your heads, 360 degrees, isn't it? Everywhere you look, you've got some projection going on. And there are these amazing things. They play Tennessee Jed, and immediately you're teleported back to Haight-Ashbury in 1967 or whatever it is. And so it's a completely absorbing thing. And when the Dead and Co. do actually appear on the screen, they only appear quite small, don't they? Did you notice that? They don't dominate the whole thing. They're just like a billboard in a virtual street. You suddenly see the guitarist playing. So you're not invited to kind of connect with them particularly. And I thought that was really interesting because, you could go along to that show knowing absolutely nothing about the Dead at all and clearly thoroughly enjoy it, couldn't you?
Yeah, I was noting that one of the celebrity guests who was there on the opening night was Cruz Beckham. Now, it's perfectly possible that Cruz Beckham, has been listening to Wake of the Flood and, I don't know what, Working Man's
Mars
Dead.
Hotel.
all these years. But he probably hasn't,
Very unlikely.
How old is he? 25 or something that. And you could well imagine that completely appealing to people who weren't particularly into the Grateful Dead or anything, because it's such a change in the scale of the thing, and it struck me it could be a real breakthrough for this kind of entertainment, because for years, ever since it's the year of Live Aid, really, it's the beginning of the age of spectacle, and everybody moves into bigger and bigger. They move outdoors, and so when you go to an outdoor show, most of your attention and most of your, field of vision is occupied by things that are not the show. They're occupied by the sky, the rest of the crowd.
Yes, that's so true.
All those other things. And so the stage, even the biggest stage, is only quite a small section of what you're looking at. And even with the big jumbo screens, it's still quite a small section. And so you have to kind of work to stay with it at a big show, unless you're absolutely on the front row where you can't see anything other than the band. And that is a unique experience in itself. But that, obviously doesn't apply to most people. Whereas you take the Sphere experience, it's completely, it appears to me to be completely relaxing because you can sit back in your seat and you can look above your head and it's all taking place all around.
You're not missing anything. You're not see and hear everything.
And just occasionally you get these shots of the whole thing where you notice that down in the bottom below the extraordinary visual display that's going on is a small stage with kind of 8 blokes operating heavy machinery.
Yeah.
And that's the group. And they're kind of in the dark, really.
Well, they are, and that's the feeling I got. It was like you're watching a movie and they're simply providing a live soundtrack. The point is not them at all. Whereas, most of those big shows, the Pink Floyd and U2 and stuff. I get the feeling you need to kind of know something about the Pink Floyd and their personalities and their folklore and the story in order to fully connect with what they're doing, and then something about the meaning of some of the songs maybe. This, not at all. Not at all. No. They're just fantastic and obviously absolutely enthralling pieces of footage that just, with a kind of noodling soundtrack. I thought it looked really captivating. I'd love to go. I mean, I like the Dead anyway, but I'd love to go. And I would be perfectly confident about taking somebody who knew nothing about the Dead at
absolutely.
all. If I could afford
Cruise Beckham.
Cruise Beckham, exactly.
Yeah. And it doesn't make you think whether there are any other acts who could kind of benefit from the same kind of presentation.
Well, we were talking about this yesterday, and you mentioned Kraftwerk, which is true, because Kraftwerk, who although Kraftwerk stuff is, it tends to be, it's kind of computer generated. It's not particularly footage, but it would certainly work because Kraftwerk's another group where it's what they look like and what they're doing and the part their personalities play in it is very, very, very low in the mix. But they would. Radiohead, I suppose. Pink Floyd, Flaming Lips, possibly. I don't know. Who do you think?
No, I think those you suggested. I think you also suggest Pet Shop Boys and so forth.
I think Pet Shop Boys would be brilliant because Pet Shop Boys songs are often about a time and place, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And about something really specific or historical moment, and that can be illustrated. The other thing that struck me, it's too late for it now actually, but the bit where the Dead start Tennessee Jed and it's in Haight-Ashbury.
Yes.
You connect the Dead with San Francisco. So it's so much part of the concept of the group, where they come from and what was happening at the time. And I thought it's too late for it now, but you could have done that with the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys' early songs, when they were almost entirely about surfing life on the Californian West Coast, would have been fantastic to hear those songs, Surfing Safari, and see that footage from the 60s. That would have been good. And there are other groups. I mean, again, it's not possible, but a lot of the Kinks mid-period music was about, mid-60s music was about swinging London, wasn't it? And the idea of seeing that performed and seeing footage of that would be really, really thrilling. But I don't know.
This is kind of beyond footage, isn't it?
Oh, it is, yeah.
Beyond performance. It's, I mean, the nearest analogy I had when I saw it was, and this must be 20 years or longer ago, no, it's more than this. I went to Universal Studios in California and took my son. We went to see the E.T. Experience.
Oh, yeah.
Which was in a theatre where you ended up with the kind of E.T. on the bicycle flying over your head and all that sort of thing. And it was pretty enthralling at the time. I didn't think to myself, this is the future of live rock and roll. But it probably is.
The Word Podcast, 2 cocoa tins and a piece of string.
Well, we've done various podcasts recently, which we ought to mention, actually, all really interesting in their own different ways. And one's with John Linnell, who's one of the two members of, with John Flansburgh, of They Might Be Giants, who I thought was really fascinating, wasn't he?
Very
one of
good.
the most extraordinary things he came up with was the idea that they now play, and they're very interested in technology, aren't they? I mean, there's a thing that you talked about, the dial-a-song thing that they did in the 1980s. Again, this is kind of pre-internet world where you could phone a phone number and they would have a cassette on the answer phone that would play their latest song, and they would change this cassette every few days. And this really kind of built their reputation, and they were kind of really ahead with whatever technology was available. And their latest ruse in this guise is that they play one of their songs backwards. So they play it in reverse. There's a song called Sapphire Bullets of Pure Love. And they look up how complicated it would have been. He did say it took a long time to learn. It's only a 2.5-minute song, but they learnt it entirely backwards. So all the instrument parts played backwards and all the vocals sung backwards. And then what they do is they film it every night. They're touring in the autumn, so you can see this. And they film it every night. And then at the end of the show, they show that film reversed. So the song comes out the right way, and you can judge as to how successfully they've executed it. Isn't that brilliant? Don't you think?
Maybe.
I had a look at it. It was really, really fantastic. As he said, it's like watching two people for whom English is their second language. But it is really impressive. It's just so funny.
It made me think about what are the other things, famous things that were recorded or done backwards. Isn't the end of the Beatles' reign backwards?
Yeah, it is.
the vocals or the whole thing? Is the whole thing backwards?
No, not the whole thing. No, just that little tiny bit. Yeah.
Right. What else? I can't think. I'm sure there are loads of other things that were done backwards. There was a bit of a fashion for a while.
There was.
Doing things backwards. We would also talk. We were very interested to talk to Paul Carrack. Boy, he was interesting, wasn't he?
Yeah, what a story.
Because I'd said to you beforehand, I said, I counted up the solo albums that Paul Carrack had made, and I think I counted 19. And I said 19, that's a lot of record companies, deciding to give him an advance or something, put out a record, because I'm always interested in the fact that the record business, although it has a justifiable reputation for being hard-nosed, it also has a less celebrated reputation for being absurdly sentimental, oddly enough, And anyway, no, the reason that Paul Carrack's put so many solo albums out is he's done most of them on his own label. He obviously tours and he's associated with loads and loads of hits, from Ace to Mike and Mechanics, all kinds of stuff. And he tours very successfully, but he also does his own material. And he was telling us that he found streaming, which most, veteran musicians tend to turn their nose up at, say it's no substitute for the living we used to make for record companies. Paul Carrack says no such thing. He says streaming has been really good for him, hasn't it?
Yeah, if you own your own label,
your own label,
then the maximum amount of that profit's going to come directly to you.
Absolutely.
I thought that was really interesting.
Very interesting.
And the other thing was that Paul Carrack is, I can't remember how old he is now. I think he's born in 1951 or whatever. But his first group, it's just incredible. He's been through so many phases of kind of rock music history. His first group was a beat group, weren't they? Isn't that right?
Oh, well, he was in a kind of Shadows type group, wasn't he?
He was a Shadows. Sorry, he was an instrumental group first.
Then in a Beatles type group.
Then a Beatles type group, and then a kind of beat group, and then an R&B group, and then he, like everyone did at the time, he then formed a prog band.
Yes, called
who he was very embarrassed talking about. Actually, bless him, called Warm Dust. The Dusters. Yeah, the Dusters then split up, and Warm Dust. He just played these things in complicated time signatures and were terribly. And he described them as earnest and serious and kind of utterly humorless, And then he went from that into
pub rock,
didn't he? And from pub rock, he then went into kind of, pop and Ace and all that and started to have hits. But, and he's now got a big band and all that. So I thought it was really interesting that he'd played in so many different variations of whatever was happening at the time.
And he is the image of, and these are people we do increasingly come across. People who are kind of lifers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we ask Paul Carrack, because we do frequently ask people, you must be enormously grateful. And he said, I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
There he is, in his 70s, still working as much as he wants to. You know what I mean? If he'd gone to work for Midland Bank, he would have been put out to pasture many, many years earlier. And will probably be quite resentful about it. But these guys, they keep going, because they can and because they like it,
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that at all. So he's on tour later in the year, isn't he? I can't remember.
Yeah, I must mention that the one I talked to Nige Tassel, old pal of ours, who'd written a book about Dexys Midnight Runners. I thought that was really interesting.
Very much.
And the thing that struck me was that, Dexys, the 24 people who were former members, he tracked them all down and interviewed them. 24 people all had one thing in common, which was they were all sort of in recovery, if that makes any sense. It was as if Dexys had been a cult. And he was talking about how, in Dexys, there was various rules laid down by Kevin Rowland, kind of no drugs and no booze, no eye contact with the audience, no eye contact with each other, I think, on stage, no smiling in photographs, And it was just interesting that in order to get people to go along with this, he had to recruit very, very young musicians. Who there was no seasoned musician who thought, I'm going to give it up and join this. They were all kind of 19, 20-year-olds just hoping for their first break and were therefore malleable and prepared to go along with it. I thought that was interesting. And also that Kevin Rowland hadn't really changed. You know, he told the story about him going on stage at a racecourse, a huge gig in the outskirts of Paris, supporting David Bowie, and everyone was shouting for Bowie. And he made the speech about how Brian Ferry had more talent in his little finger than David Bowie in his entire body or whatever, to this audience, at which point the sound was cut and the group were actually right there and then thrown off the tour. And he made the point that Kevin Rowland was still the same, really. That Kevin Rowland Dexys could have reformed now, and they could be touring the festival circuit, couldn't they? A version of Dexys, playing the early Dexys with Gino, and then playing "Come On Eileen." That people would love it.
They would,
but he won't do it. He just won't. He will only carry on operating in the way he wants to. He's really curmudgeon. You've got to admire him for it in a way.
No, I do like, I do like kind of awkward sods, really.
He is an awkward sod.
Go along with it, There's lots to be said for it. So we should mention that, all this stuff exists for our Patreon supporters in full visuals and slightly earlier. And so if you're not already a Patreon supporter, you might like to think of joining them, because you'll be helping keep this, what we like to think is a rich range of material. You'd be helping to keep this stuff coming forth. And so if you haven't already done so, you might like to look into that by going to patreon.com/wordinyour-ear and look at how you could get involved. What else have we not mentioned, Mark? We didn't mention, we're talking about David Bowie, actually.
Well, you should mention Diamond Dogs.
David Bowie came up with Guy Chambers, didn't he? Who was the other person that we talked.
Oh, Guy Chambers, yes.
We had a very interesting chat with Guy Chambers this last week, and he's on tour soon. And
Guy Chambers, who most people know mostly from the stuff he wrote with Robbie Williams, has written with so many people, incredibly successful songwriter. Again, the thing that struck me was that, how early he started. If people are prodigious talents, you can usually spot that fairly early. And he said that, we're talking about the first records or the first song he wrote. He said, well, I didn't write songs till I wrote it until I was a bit older, but when I was 11, I wrote a string quartet. And he talked about being 11 years old, writing a string quartet, and the magic of hearing four people bring that sheet music to life, which I thought was really fantastic. And then when he was at school, aged about 14, he wrote a rock opera. And you think, this is phenomenal. There are certain people out there, Stevie Wonder writing, Uptight when he was 15 or whatever. And I can't remember how old Kate Bush was when she wrote The Man with the Child in His Eyes, but very, very early, But that was pretty extraordinary to write a string quartet at 11.
But his father was an orchestral musician.
That's right.
So, it was.
So he could get that executed for him.
Family business, really.
Yeah, it was.
But he mentioned an interesting thing about David Bowie, that when he was playing with Robbie Williams, some charity show, I can't remember what the show was.
Oh, yeah, it was called Netaid, I think. Wasn't it Netaid at Wembley?
Right.
Yeah.
And how Robbie Williams was on the bill, George Michael was on the bill, and David Bowie was on the bill. And so somebody decided that Robbie Williams would be top. Was it George Michael second?
George Michael second, and Bowie was third on the bill.
Yes, and they didn't take to it kindly, did they?
No, Bowie's reaction was to play all his songs in a sort of outre kind of jazz way, to just annoy everybody, I think, to advertise the fact that he was extremely dissatisfied about being there in the first place. How would you resolve that? God knows. Impossible. And then George Michael then came on 20 minutes late, didn't he? Cutting into Robbie Williams' set. So everybody was that's charity for you, Dave.
Absolutely, that's charity. So talking to David Bowie again, this week, in 1974, which is 50 years ago, Mark, 50 years ago, David Bowie released...
I was at college.
Diamond Dogs. I must have been working at a record shop. Yeah, I don't remember it coming. It also came out around about the same time. Bad Company, the first album by Bad Company.
That's right.
Was a huge deal. And sheet music by 10cc, which had... Yeah. Was that the one that had the Dean and I on it? Things like that.
Yeah, and Journey to the Centre of the Earth by Rick Wakeman. That teleports you back to a moment in time, isn't it?
I was looking at an old chart Did I send you an old chart? I think I did, didn't I? From Record Mirror or something from 1974. Did we have that?
I saw I was looking at the difference between the singles chart and the album chart in 1974 in that week, which was May 74. It could not be more pronounced. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because that was a time when there was the Overground of singles buyers, and then there was the rock underground, totally different worlds. So the singles chart is Sugar Baby Love, it's the Rollers, it's Paper Lace, it's the Osmonds, it's David Cassidy and the Wombles, right? That's the singles chart. And you look at the LP chart, it's Tubular Bells, Dark Side of the Moon, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Cat Stevens, and then I think the rogue one is the Sting movie soundtrack, which is the Scott Joplin, isn't it? The Entertainer and all that, Yes. But basically, so you've got the singles are kind of cheesy kind of stuff that teenage girls with a touch of eyeliner on would be dancing to, and in white shoes, and the albums with sort of furrowed browed old heads sitting around on scatter cushions, wasn't it?
Well, that was the time that our old colleague Mike Appleton was kind of Whistle Test had been going about 3 years or something by then. And Mike's whole way that he kept Whistle Test on the air within the BBC, where the powers that be couldn't detect any difference between one load of buffoons playing amplified music and another load of buffoons playing amplified music. He used to say, "We're about albums. Top of the Pops is about singles. That's the difference. You're catering to two separate audiences." And so, it was kind of true for a short period of time, I suppose. And, that would be it. 1974. The thing about Diamond Dogs, which, as I say, came out this week in 1974, was that I hadn't realized this, that Bowie got in slightly ahead of the Rolling Stones to get a cover of his record designed by Guy Peeleart? I think it is.
Guy Peeleart, I think, yeah.
The Belgian,
Peeleart,
the Belgian illustrator, who had I think the sequence of events is as follows: that Guy Peeleart reads Nick Cohen's wonderful book, A Wop Bop a Loo Bop a Lop Bam Boom, which I still recommend as the great instant history of rock and roll. It's a brilliant book, and came out in 71. And he was enormously enthralled by this. And so he approached Nick Cohen about doing a book of illustrations kind of based on it. So out of that came that book, Rock Dreams, which everybody had. It was a kind of big softback, illustrated thing. And it's kind of, I think it's probably been suppressed nowadays. I haven't seen a copy for years. It's probably full of stuff that you wouldn't want to.
Yeah, that's true. It's sort of invisible, isn't it?
Yeah, they
probably a bit ropey, but underdressed girls and
Well, yeah, there's
evident drug abuse.
Yeah, there's. It is the great illustrated celebration of rock and roll as bad behavior incarnate, isn't it? Really, that's what it was all about.
Which, when you were about 14 or 15 and you looked at that book, you just thought, that's the life I'd love.
I was older than that, and I thought that.
That looks fantastic. Just dissolute people behaving very badly.
So anyway, he has this book, and Mick Jagger thinks that's a good idea for the cover of the new Stones album. And so Guy Peeleart went on the road with the Rolling Stones, actually, sketching them or whatever, getting visual ideas. And then Mick Jagger didn't return his calls for a while. And then he met Bowie, and Bowie said, "Would you do the cover for my next record?" He said, "Fine," thinking he wasn't going to hear from the Rolling Stones again. And so the thing of David Bowie and the dog and so forth, which controversially featured his penis in an early.
That's right, because you open it up and the back half was the back half of the dog, wasn't it? And the genitalia were considered to be terribly. In fact, isn't that one of the most collectible albums?
I don't know. I've got a copy of it. I don't think it's particularly all that controversial. I don't know if it even made its way onto the final one anyway. But that was a story. And so when Mick Jagger saw this, he was furious.
Yeah, because they came out 2 or 3 months later, didn't they?
Yeah, with what I think is a better cover, I shall actually. That's the cover of It's Only Rock and Roll.
It's Only Rock and Roll.
Where they are, surrounded by dancing girls or whatever it is coming down the stairs. So that's Diamond Dogs, which was kind of the last of that kind of David Bowie, wasn't it? It was the last of the kind of strange mullet post Ziggy Stardust David Bowie, wasn't it? When he came back, he was different. He
started to go into the suits and the soul soon after, didn't he?
Yes, I suppose.
Different thing.
I said, the next one, the following year, would be Young Americans, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
So anyway, 50 years ago, this year, Diamond Dogs, where were you?
The Word Podcast, walking the digital dog since 2007.
And finally, we like to deal with the burning issues in popular music on this podcast. We like to think we got our finger firmly on the throbbing pulse of popular music. And we discuss the subjects that really matter to people. And this week, we've been thinking about the pronunciation of Louis Armstrong. Is that right, Mark?
Well, yeah, because just as some new record came out, I just got a press release about it, and it just reminded me that we are now invited to call him Louis, aren't we?
Yeah.
As indeed he called himself.
As indeed.
If you listen to Hello, Dolly,
this is Louis.
This is Louis Dolly.
He
calls
himself Louis. But the world decided, no, that can't be right because it's spelt Louis, therefore we'll do it Louis. And it was only his very close kind of jazz pals who called him Louis, which is the way he would refer to himself, or his wife would call him, or whatever. Yeah. The rest of the world called him Louis. And it is interesting because he's not the only major musical name where there's some uncertainty about the correct way to pronounce his name.
Well, David Bowie, certainly, wasn't it? It was David Bowie or David Bowie. Well, it's Bowie. We're absolutely sure it's Bowie now, but for a while you had absolutely no idea.
Absolutely, no. And, what else? You were telling me about the pronunciation of Adele. Is that right?
Adele said in an interview that the correct pronunciation of her name is Adele, not Adele. It's Adele.
Adele.
But nobody calls her that, do they? It's always Adele. You wouldn't say Adele.
No.
If you went on Radio 4 and said, I'm here to review the new album by Adele, they'd say, surely you mean Adele.
We'd take that again, they'd say.
Yeah, we'll take that from the top. You've just been wrong,
Absolutely. So is it Ariana
Grande?
Grande, not Grande. Not
Grande.
As in the coffee.
Absolutely Grande. Hoosker Doo is actually Hoosker Doo.
Hoosker Doo.
Yngwie Malmsteen. Hyam is actually they're called Hyam. You know the girl group Hyam, and it's not Haim or Heem, it's Hyam.
Hyam.
And then you get into others outside of all this. Do you remember Kim Basinger? Everyone used to call her Kim Basinger. Kim Basinger. That's the correct pronunciation.
Next time I bump into her, I'll try and correct.
I get it right. I know. Steve Buscemi. You have to learn these things. Impossible. There's probably loads more I've missed out. If you can think of any more mispronunciations, let us know.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.